Hello, everyone. I'm Jay Lazega. Welcome to this installment of L&J's Morning Break. We hope you're well. It's been a while. We've been distracted a little bit by taking kids to college, Jason having a beautiful baby girl, life, everything else going on. But we're back, and we are happy you're here. Happy you've joined us. We love hearing from you guys. Thanks to all of you who keep reaching out, sending emails or texts to say hi. I personally love that. I love hearing from you guys. I could spend all day reaching out to you guys to say hi. We have an interesting subject today. We're talking about something that is honestly already a mess of an issue and going to become even more of a mess of an issue over the next, I think right now it's 38 days. The math is not great. But we're going to talk about political and social justice sides. And this issue is affecting your communities. It is everywhere. We are joined today by Jennifer Roberts, Taylor Mathis. Hi, guys. They're going to be great, give you information today. Before starting, we're going to cover a couple things. And you know, we're very practical in how we advise boards and what we do and what we say. So we're going to cover what is, we believe, the law in Georgia on this issue, but we're also going to cover the real world. And that is what maybe we should or have to do anyway. And some of you may not honestly like the message we give. That's okay. But we want to give you real advice, practical advice. So we're going to talk about that today. And you guys know if you have questions during these sessions, the menu bar has a spot for you to ask questions and send them in. We may not answer them all during the session, but we will get back to you after. Individually, we'll reach out, we'll let you know when we can help and answers to your questions. We're also going to keep the session open for a few minutes afterwards so that you can ask your questions at the end, and we'll get back to you and we'll reach out with individual answers. We also have a special thing in this one. Using that same question function, we would love to hear from you suggestions on topics that you would like us to cover in upcoming morning breaks. And as an incentive, we have a treat for you. So the 3 best ideas in topics for future morning breaks is going to get one of our new L&J water bottles. We've got leftover bling that we're going to be giving out at some of these sessions. Come back because occasionally some of them will be super bling, but we'd love to hear your ideas on sessions. Put it in the questions, and we will pick the 3 best and send you your rewards. Already see a couple of notes. Thank you for the beard. I'm not so much growing a beard as not shaving, is what I tell people. And I am very disturbed by how gray I am these days. But okay, on our sessions, one quick reminder. Visit our website, ljlaw.com, the resources section. Many of you have already done it. We have tons of information, sample documents. You know, we've put up a lot related to the COVID mess, but things related to annual meetings and other things, elections, use them and have your board use those. You don't even have to be one of our clients or have your boards be one of our clients. We believe it's so important to be connected to the industry that we get that stuff up for you to use. So we want you to use that. We also have a handout that I believe Taylor is going to talk about in this one. Just as a little treat, if you look in handouts and you click on the political JPEG, the picture, and open that, that is exactly why we're having this session today. So a little lightness in the session. Feel free to open that and look at it. Feel free to explain to your boards why they need to consider this an issue important, because that's what's going to happen in our communities. Okay, and again, no representation from us about which political candidates are right or wrong. The only issue is signs being an aesthetic issue in our community, and we're going to talk about that. So without further ado, we're going to start with Jen, thank you guys again.
Thanks, Jay. Hello, I'm Jen Roberts. I just, first of all, I don't think it's surprising to anybody that general restrictions on lawn signage are quite common in communities having restrictive covenants. Many of you probably have such restrictions. Now, a community association's attempt to enforce those restrictions on political signs and displays, that can be a sticky issue, and it can also become a heated one. And I'm just guessing that a common objection that you'll hear from owners is that the First Amendment protects his or her right to post signs bearing political message, their right to free speech on their front lawn or on their front door or over their back gate or wherever it can be seen by the most people. Is this true? Yes and no. Yes, everyone knows you have a right to free speech in this country, and it's protected by the First Amendment. That applies to political speech and political signs. What's important for our owners to understand, though, is that the First Amendment protects us from government action. The government cannot restrict your speech unreasonably or politically just ban you from disagreeing with them. So, for example, say you post a political sign in your front yard and the police show up one day and pull it out of your yard and say there's a county ordinance that bans all political signs. Well, then you may have a First Amendment issue. Flip that and it's a community association just enforcing a restriction on signs in the community. The First Amendment doesn't apply. You only have protection from the government, and a community association by and large is going to be considered a private entity. It is. I mean, and in most cases, they're nonprofit corporations. They're not government entities. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some instances where you can have a very, very large community with a powerful association that does kind of operates as a city, does trash collection, security, even road maintenance. Oh, okay, that'll be your exception to the rule. And if that is the case, then you might have to think about the First Amendment, somewhat. But in the vast majority of communities, this is not a real concern. Constitutional free speech protections are rarely applicable to community associations. And a second thing owners need to understand, and I think this is most important in our line of work here, is that people understand our constitutional rights are not absolute. They're not limitless. If you think about it, we go out into the world every day and accept restrictions on our constitutional rights. I mean, all you have to do is walk into a school, an airport, courthouse. Well, your Second Amendment right to carry a gun is limited in those places, and is your free speech. Even if you're going to have a protest, you have to get a permit. Just as often, we agree to put other limitations and restrictions on our constitutional rights, and that's what happens in a neighborhood that has restricted covenants. Basically, it's a contract. When an owner buys in a community that has restricted covenants, that they will agree to abide by the rules that are in the document, that are in the declaration. So when you're contacted by an owner who says that the association is infringing on their rights or violating their First Amendment rights or banning them from doing something they should be allowed to do, well, that's not really the issue. The issue is that the owner made a promise that he would not post sign in his yard, that he made a promise not to post a political sign, depending on the language. So it's a matter of whether or not they keep their end of the bargain. They keep their promise that they wouldn't do what they said they would do. And so that's the First Amendment. Pretty easy. Hey? It doesn't apply to community associations, and it's a contract issue, not so much a constitutional issue. But as managers and board members, you'll also need to be cognizant of state and local laws that might restrict the association's ability to ban owners from posting political signs completely. There actually are some states that provide owners with greater rights than what the First Amendment does, and says that community associations cannot ban homeowners from advertising their political views on the front lawn. Texas, Washington, a few others say, there can be no complete ban. And there's some other states where there's no law, but the courts have decided, you know what, we agree, there can't be a complete ban. Well, here, the state of Georgia, not one of those states. It has not enacted any such legislation. Currently, there's no Georgia state law prohibiting or restricting community from banning political displays. Also, the Georgia appellate courts have found that it's okay for a community association to actually ban all signs in a community. So you may have a community or be in a community that has a declaration that with a provision prohibiting owners from erecting or placing signs in the community without approval from the architectural committee or the board. Under the current law and precedent, these provisions would likely be upheld and enforced by the courts. Again, also, there's always a caveat or an exception. Keep in mind, more and more states are moving towards, allowing political speech more freely and against restrictions and or a complete ban. A court may at any time decide that they don't like a complete ban. And there are also local and state ordinances that will affect your restrictions. I mean, if you have a community that's near a polling place or public right of way, there are some local ordinances that will restrict signs as well. Obviously, you can't obstruct traffic, common sense stuff. But if your question coming here today is, can you enforce a complete ban on political signs in your community? Can your current sign restriction be enforced to require the removal of political signs during election season? Yes and yes. Now, the better question, like Jay said, might be, should you ban political signs entirely? And should you carve out an exception to political expression in your current sign regulations? That's for Taylor.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everybody. I'm Taylor Mathis, and I will be covering the second piece of this conversation, which is how do we handle political signs in our community and how are we going to regulate them? We've already talked about the fact that we do not recommend restricting them entirely. We know that trends are anti-association, pro-social justice, pro-freedom of speech, freedom of showing our political expression, and we want to embrace those. We want to encourage owners to participate in the political process and to have those views, but to do so in a way that is still in line with our community standards and is not offensive or polarizing. We also recognize that while Georgia courts have still upheld community association authority to restrict or ban political signs or signs in general, that may change. And even though that may be the case now, we want to embrace these current changing trends and allow for flexibility rather than risk having owner pushback. With political viewpoints, any sort of restriction might create owner friction, and we do not want to risk litigation for issues involving political signs. The time, money, expenses that we may spend on litigation, even if we come out winning, are just not worth our time and are better spent put towards something else. Another possibility is that if we do impose an overall ban on political signs, we might end up on the nightly news or on social media as the community that's trying to ban free speech. And even though we know that's not the case, we do not want that look for our communities. So what we recommend is instead creating flexible regulations that are uniformly applied for political signs. Some of the ways that we can do that are creating reasonable rules that apply to political signs for temporary periods of time, just basic time, manner, place restrictions that allow owners to express themselves politically while also addressing eyesore concerns like those you might see in the handout. We know that owners want to participate in the political process, and we want to encourage that. We do so with these restraints. So some examples you might see in a sign policy would be requirements such as requiring that a sign is professionally created, restrictions against signs that are made on poster board with markers, or banning signs that are that have flashing lights or blinking lights or anything that might be a distraction to motorists or pedestrians. We might also want to create a policy that requires that the signs are relevant to the ongoing election. Obviously, a sign for a candidate in a local, state, or presidential election would be relevant. We also consider social justice signs to be relevant for these purposes, in addition to signs for public questions or referendums. But a sign for an election in Russia would not be something that would fall in these categories. We would not consider that to be relevant for our political purposes here. We also might think about restricting signs that are offensive or have inappropriate imagery to make sure that we're being mindful of others in the community that might be offended by those signs. Other restrictions we might consider are requiring the number of signs per lot in a single family community, creating a reasonable amount, maybe 3 signs per lot or 5, or in a condominium association, maybe that number is less. Likewise, location of the signs, if we are only requiring them in the front yard to be placed in certain areas of the front yard, or in windows, or in a condominium association, if we are only allowing the signs to be placed in windows or on a balcony. Likewise, we might think about creating location restrictions, making it clear that common property and common elements are neutral zones and that no owner can place any political signs in those areas. We might also think about, just in general, how to craft these rules and regulations to fit the needs of our community and what our community members are looking for. These will be different for each community, but the key here is making sure that the rules that we create are uniformly applied in a way where everyone is able to express themselves politically, but in a way that's still in line with our community standards and in a way that is not harmful or offensive. The last piece of this, and another question that we're getting a lot, is what about time restrictions for these political signs? If we're going to allow this carve-out exception, can we create a certain time period? And we say yes. One of the most common time periods that we see is allowing signs to be placed anywhere from 45 to 30 days before an election, and then requiring that the signs be removed anywhere from the day of the election to a few days after, maybe 7. Again, these rules and regulations are subject to change based on the community, but they're one way for us to implement these regulations in a way that encourages political expression, but keeps us from having eyesores on our front yards. I'll go back to Jay.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. That was great. So a couple of thoughts, my thoughts. Again, you know, very practical. And I think the most important thing to me is look, nobody likes community associations right now. We are not the most favored status people. And you guys know courts are not always right. And they can be political just like everybody else. And while we think the law conceptually is very clear that if our covenants say signs are prohibited, that's enforceable. It doesn't mean we don't get skewered by a judge or by media or social media, and if we completely prohibit political signs. And by political signs, we are talking about both campaign signs and the social justice signs, which you know you already have in your communities. So we think the better approach is, or people want them, and they are our constituents. Make regulations that control it, limiting it to just the official signs, not the mocked up people going crazy making their own signs, but very limited number, very limited location, specific time period, and let them do it. And one of the things that this lets us do, a couple people mentioned this, is probably in some of our communities, we have let people do things like put up their Clemson or University of Florida flags, or their, thanks to the healthcare industry signs. We have not enforced. And it's a big risk to us if we don't enforce our covenants and our rules and regulations. And some boards have asked, how do we get control? And can we stop it now and stop the political signs when a third of our community has these other things? And we think one way to do that is make a policy that's going to cover all of it now. and said, here's what we're going to allow in signs and the time period signs and flags and whatever. And all of this ends 5 days after the election. So we completely clean house, regain control of everything. The social justice signs, the political signs, the graduation signs that may still be up in the communities. We think that is the right approach. Taylor mentioned that, there's obviously a difference between subdivisions, townhome communities where people have access to yards, and the condominiums where maybe they only have patios, windows, and other things. And some of our documents allow us to regulate even inside windows from what we can see outside. We treat that the same. The message is the same regardless of what space people have. Our regulation or policy may be different for a high-rise condo, for example, than a subdivision where people have front yards. But the message we think is still the same, that people are going to do it. They want to do it. They're going to do it. We're going to have signs. Let's regulate it instead of try to fight the world and social media and TV on keeping everybody from putting signs up. Again, though, I think the answer is limited in time, limited to official candidate signs, the ones you get from them. Keep it clean, keep it easy. So thank you, guys. We had some great topic suggestions for future ones. So we are definitely going to give out some prizes to people, and we will do that in future ones. We hope you come back. We love hearing from you. We miss you guys so much. Hopefully the shutdown of the world, the threats to all of us will end soon, and we'll be back to some sense of normal where we get to see each other again soon. We really miss you guys. Thanks for joining us. LJ Law Resources, visit that. Jen, Taylor, awesome job. Thank you, guys. We're going to keep this open for another 2 or 3 minutes so you can send your last suggestions or questions. We'll get back to those of you who we didn't answer, but take care, stay safe.